Ladies and gentlemen, have you been playing Valorant, but you're not hitting every single shot? You're not popping off like you see streamers and high-level players do? Well, in this video, let's break down exactly why you miss every shot and give you actionable steps about how to acquire godlike aim. Speaking of godlike, it would be extremely godlike of you to smash that subscribe button. We passed 50k subscribers, but let's get well on our way to 100k. Thank you so much. Please smash the subscribe button. Anyways, without further ado, let's just jump right into it, shall we? Now, the first thing you need before you start hitting godlike shots is you need the perfect sense. Now, I've broken down a lot of the common sensitivities about pro players in my previous video, but a TLDR of that is that lower relative sense is typically the best. Typically, across many of the high-level players and streamers that we have looked into, an under 600 EDPI is suggested, which would be your sensitivity in-game times your mouse DPI. Now, regardless of that, what is actually important is that you use all three zones of your arm to move and properly aim. What I mean by this is you use your arm, your actual arm, for larger flicks, like doing 180 double flashes or just moving your whole body around. I would also suggest a fairly large mouse pad. I legit use a Magic the Gathering playmat. Something huge that takes up your whole desk is definitely suggested. Now, the second zone would be your wrist. And what your wrist is for is actually on-screen flicking and general tracking. So you use your arm to do the huge movements and you do wrist to do that flicking and tracking movements. And then you use the last zone, your fingers, for the micro changes to hit an enemy's head when the crosshair is close to them. It's for the very small movements. Now, what this does, and the reason that you do this, is that you basically give yourself tools to hit specific shots. Kind of like how an artist has a large paintbrush to draw one thing, and different size other paintbrushes to draw smaller things or anything like that. You need different types for different in-game actions, and if you relate it to this, you use all three of the zones for different in-game actions so that you get the maximum amount of control over exactly what you're aiming at. You're using a combination of all three to basically perfectly hit your target. Now, if you want to find your perfect sensitivity, I would highly suggest use the PSA method. It's an extremely lengthy process, but you only have to do it one time, and I highly suggest it because after you do the PSA method, then you'll be well on your way to start grinding your mechanical skill and improving because you're going to have that perfect sense. So definitely go look up a guide and get that perfect sense. Now, I'm going to include it here because I get a lot of questions about what mouse to use and how important is your mouse. You definitely need a gaming mouse where you can adjust your DPI, of course. But as far as choosing the specific mouse, there are a lot to choose from, and a lot of them are pretty cheap. You can even find good mouses for $20 ballpark. But in general, I personally think that lighter mouses can feel less cumbersome than heavier mouses. Specifically, I would not suggest any mouses that are over 90 grams, but of course, personal preference is going to be a big role here. For reference, I used to use a SteelSeries 110 Rival at 87.5 grams, but when I swapped over to the Glorious Model Low at only 67 grams, at first it took me a while to adjust because it was such a huge transition in weight, but now I can confidently say that I will never ever go back to a heavier mouse, and I truly believe that my mechanical skill is quite better now because of my lighter mouse. Now, next up is practice sessions, and this is after you get your perfect sensitivity and you have your perfect mouse. This is what you need to do in order to get that godlike aim. The first thing that you want to do is build muscle memory. Now, there is one tool that is no doubt the best at building muscle memory extremely quickly, and that's Kovac Aim Trainer. For reference, muscle memory is that buildup of flicking, tracking, moving your fingers, your wrist, and your arm all in conjunction in order to hit your shots. And it's kind of like if your arm remembers the movement so that you can easier perform it in-game without having to correct yourself again and again. The more your muscle memory is honed into your arm, the easier the shots will be automatically because you don't want to have to think every time you aim. You want it to be automatic and intuitive. Now, going back to Kovac Aim Trainer, there's tons of different ways to practice your aim, and here are the different ways that I would suggest to practice your aim. You need to practice close range tracking versus longer range tracking. It's important to distinguish these because you're going to be using your wrist and arm a lot more from closer range, And you're going to be using your fingertips and wrist from the further ranges because on your screen, you're not moving your crosshair as far, so that's important for you to actually practice both types. Now, I'd also suggest you practice closer range flicking versus longer range flicking. This is very similar to the same way where if someone's really close to you and you have to flick to them on the fly, often you're going to have to swipe your whole arm, and it's still something you're going to practice, and you should practice even if it doesn't come up all that often in game. Now, the last thing you probably should practice that I like to practice is reactionary flicking, which is just when targets fly at the screen and you have to flick one after the other, one after the other. It's reactionary practice drills. Now, after you do all this to build up your muscle memory, then you could take it in-game and go into the training room. What you want to be doing is practicing all the gunplay fundamentals that are in Valorant specifically. So things like counter strafing. Make sure that you're running into walking into pressing the opposite key that you're running in and stopping, hitting that perfect shot. That counter strafing is on point. Make sure that you master the spray control and really practice it from every single one of the weapons that you like to use so that you know exactly how to compensate it. Practice compensating it against the bots, flicking on different guns, and make sure that you practice controlled burst on every single one of the major guns that you like to use. Now, keep in mind, as you're doing this in order to build up that godlike aim, you should also be taking note of what you're kind of doing, because you should have a cycle that you warm up and do every single day that will help break off rust from the sleep before, the night before, so that you can get warmed up really quickly before rank. So really notice exactly what you're doing here and try to make it like a slight regimen or like a practice session that you have to warm up every time before you plan to play ranked or anything like that. Now, the next thing that you need to do, and this is extremely important, and if you don't do this, it could greatly mess up your aim, and you need to keep in mind your start position. What your start position is it's how close you're sitting to the screen. What is your posture like? Where is your mouse centered? Whether or not you smash the like button. How far your chair is from your table. Everything should be perfectly the same at a start position. If you can make sure that your start position is exactly the same every single time you sit down and practice and warm up, and every single time you play, you can avoid any discrepancies in your aim and make it so that every single time that you play, you're still playing incredibly consistently, because there's nothing like playing really good one day, you're popping off, you're hitting all the shots, and then the next day, you just feel like you can't hit anything and you don't know why. A lot of time, your start position, your posture, or all the things that I talked about, especially smashing the like button, one of these things is off, and that is preventing you from actually playing the way that you practice and playing the way that you always play. Now, next up is Gunplay Fundamentals that even an experienced FPS player should always revisit if you want to make sure that you reach and constantly improve your aim, because I guarantee you, you can always improve your aim. It's never to the best it could possibly be unless your name is Shroud or Defran. Now, don't forget that the pivot point from the wall greatly changes when you're peeking an angle. If you're further from the corner along the wall, you will see enemies before they see you if you're peeking that angle. If you truly want to understand this concept, then I will include the link down below so that you can go check out the video where we cover this in depth, because it's really important to understand why enemies might be seeing you before you see them when you're trying to peek them. Now, furthermore, typical crosshair placement, make sure that it's always head level, of course. This is pretty basic stuff as far as FPS is concerned, but for all you new players out there, just make sure that the crosshair is head level so that you can easily flick to it. It means that you have to move the mouse far less and still hit the shot, which makes it easier on you. Also, make sure that when you're holding a corner, give yourself a little bit of wiggle room off the wall so that you can easily compensate whether an enemy swings wide or swings close. You are not just hugging the wall, because if an enemy swings wide, it's going to make it harder on you in order to flick. Now, if you're a newer player, you might be asking, what is the point in doing all this? The point here is to get godlike aim. Why do I need to make it easier on myself if my aim is going to be godlike? Well, the thing is, if you take these fundamentals and apply them to your game, then you'll be able to actually hit more shots without actually increasing your mechanical skill. That means that your floor, your baseline, is going to be even higher, and that means the baseline amount of shots and value that you're going to get is going to be higher as a result, and then your mechanical skill will just build on top of that, because the thing that you need to understand is that there's really no cap in mechanical skill, so you should take every advantage that you get. Doesn't matter how good you are, it doesn't mean that you can neglect the fundamentals. And some players that have even better mechanical skill than you, if they lack the fundamentals in the game of Valorant, you could still beat them time and time again in gun battles. So that's something to really keep in mind. Do not neglect the fundamentals. Now, another thing in general that a lot of players are doing that might be making it so that they are dying before they can get shots off is that they're relying on crouch way too much to control their spray. Crouching is way underpowered in this game versus CS, and it can make yourself a liability where you're easier to headshot, especially if the enemy is not correctly aiming head level. Practice spray pattern control while standing, and then only in the longest of bursts where your enemy and you are low, and you know that if you try to stop firing, you're gonna die. Those are one of the only times that you should be crouching, with the other small exception of when an enemy is like right up to you and you're trying to mess up where their crosshair is. You could potentially crouch and then kill them if you're like right really close to them and maybe dodge like a ghost shot or something like that. Now, the next big concept that you need to get down that's really going to help you start getting actual kills with your godlike aim is abusing Pikas Advantage in Valorant. While I know that the Riot team is trying to do whatever they can to deal with Pikas Advantage, it is just going to be a part of the game, most likely for its entire life cycle. With the exception of holding an AWP at a long angle, Pikas Advantage, especially in the AR versus AR duel, feels absolutely disgusting when you're holding an angle and you feel like you should win the matchup, but a guy just runs on the corner and headshots you. Now, especially if anyone in the lobby has higher ping, Pikas Advantage will be even worse, and holding angles becomes far worse as a result. That means that being the aggressor gives you a huge advantage. Especially if you know where enemies are, waiting for them to swing is often a quick route to death, and it's usually far better for you to be the aggressor instead and swing the enemies. Now, the last thing that I have for you in this video, and it might not be what you want to hear, but is the absolute truth. You will not build your mechanical skill overnight. Mechanical skill is something that takes time, effort, and diligence in order to improve. Now, if you incorporate all the things that I said in this video, it's gonna put you on a good path in order to improve your mechanics. It's gonna set you up for success instead of setting you up for failure, which is definitely good, but at the end of the day, you need to be grinding hours into the game. You need to be practicing like a madman. You need to be playing like a madman. Every single player that you ever run into that has godlike aim has the thousands and thousands of hours behind them in order to actually earn that aim. So, especially if you're behind the curve with playing no shooters, then that means that you need to work double time in order to actually make sure that your aim improves. And even if you have put those thousands and thousands of hours into FPSs and you think your aim is pretty good, I guarantee you there's always more and there's always further that you can go. So it's our job to make sure that we grind day in and day out, trying to improve our mechanical skill, because the thing about mechanical skill is that it will always go with you as long as you make it tuned, make it honed, you break off the rust. If your mechanical skill is very, very good, then you will be good at every single shooter from here into the day you die. You basically get to take that with you, and it's something that you put all this time and effort to build, but it's not something that will just go away just like that. Once you become a mechanically insane player, then no matter what game, as long as it's a shooter, you will be able to compete with the best of the best because your mechanics are there to support you through any transition. So do yourself a favor and get to grinding. Anyways, if you like this video, do me a huge solid and smash that sub button. We're on our way to getting to 100K subscribers, and we would love it if you could become part of the GameLeap community. Anyways, that's all we got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and of course, until next time.